I'm back, and today the history of the Sinclair ZX Spectrum 8-bit micro home computer is well documented on the internet. Here on YouTube, many wonderful creators make great videos about the system. And they all have two things in common. First, they're all British, and second, they're all way better at speaking English and writing video scripts than me. But despite that, I'd like to add a little something to the recorded history of the ZX Spectrum. And that is the story of the machine's rise and demise in the Netherlands.
Let's all turn on the tube. This is hot dog soup.
The Sinclair ZX Spectrum was of course designed and produced in Britain, and that's where it's sold in huge numbers. But it was also available in mainland Europe. It's fairly well known that the Spectrum was huge in Spain, for example, and even the 128K model was introduced there before it was introduced in the UK. Worldwide, the machine was also very well known and loved, either officially or as illegal clones, with many users, developers and enthusiasts in the Soviet Union, Ukraine, Belarus, South American countries, North America, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, and probably a lot of other countries I failed to mention. And we never hear the story on how the Specky arrived there, how big it was, and how it eventually faded away. But for the Netherlands, I know that story. I was there and I watched the rise and demise of this amazing little 8-bit box of fun. In this video I'm going to tell you my story about what it was like to be a Spectrum owner and user in the Netherlands. Were Dutch magazines and software any good? Did we have access to international releases and information? Were there any hugely popular Dutch games? And was the machine the same as the British one? How many Speckies were sold here, and were they even available in shops? And what caused the demise of Dutch magazines and Dutch hobby computer clubs? All will be told in this video. But first of all, to prove that I'm an actual, real, honest-to-Buddha ZX Spectrum person, I still have the original Crash magazine 3D glasses, and I also own not one, but two original Your Sinclair badges. Can you see them? Please focus. Yes, there they are. I ported the ZX Spectrum Classic Advanced Lawnmower Simulator to iOS and macOS, as well as my favorite basic typing game Dotty The Kangaroo. And my mom back in the day even made this to represent me. So yeah, I'm epic. On to the Spectrum. It was a very well known and loved machine in the Netherlands, but mostly in its early years. From the 16K model on, it was available here in specialized computer shops, but it also became available in large department stores and electronic shops as well. The machine, however, was never on the top shelf and mostly stuck in a corner somewhere, except for its first couple of years. When you found it in stores where computers were displayed for anyone to use, Spectrums were often disconnected or not switched on at all. Many a time I had to power them up myself to quickly write some advanced software to up their chances of being noticed. Just like in the UK, the Specky was about half the price of a C64. I couldn't find sales numbers for my country, and most of the roughly 5 million Spectrums were of course sold in the UK. Ads for the ZX Spectrum were always kind of small, and they placed the machine in between Commodore and MSX machines, the Tandy TRS-80 and micros like the Acorn Electron. The Specky was always just one of many other options, and it even had to compete with a specific Dutch microcomputer, the Philips P2000. The Spectrum was never the main star of any ad, except in those published by LOI, a large Dutch educational institution that offered a course which came with a real ZX Spectrum, but more on that later. The machine started to gain momentum when a large Dutch department store called V&D in 1984 launched a computer club. It was called MCN, and I think they stole the diagonal lines in their logo from the Specky, but I'm not sure. When MCN launched, it initially only focused on the ZX Spectrum and the C64, so I was really happy to have a club for my own computer, even though I had to share it with stupid Commodore people. V&D in their ads focused on educational aspects of these machines as well as entertainment. MCN published Dutch software and books for the Spectrum and C64, most of which were educational. Their software titles were sort of amateurish and nobody really played them more than once. You know, titles like How to Use Your Spectrum, Everything You Need to Know About the Spectrum, a puzzle game, a strategy management game, a utility and also a text adventure. Almost all of these titles are missing in action, by the way, so if you have them lying around in your house, please let me know so we can add them to the archives. Anyone who bought a home micro from VND got an MCN membership for free, and by 1985 they already had 30,000 members. Due to their large advertising budgets, MCN became the largest and most well-known computer club of the country. Of course, these 30,000 people weren't all Spectrum owners, and in fact we were a minority. In my own memory, I found the MCN and its magazines quite disappointing because there was so much attention for things other than the ZX Spectrum. Soon after MCN became big, they started to also write about other machines, and in later years even about PCs, which they then also started to sell. But this had been the plan for MCN all along. In 2009, its founder, Maurice de Hond, this guy, admitted that the MCN was founded to first get micros in the homes of people and then gradually move them on to PCs. However, despite that, they still played a huge role in making the ZX Spectrum known in the Netherlands. So they weren't really a C64 and Spectrum enthusiast club. The real enthusiasts could be found in many hobby clubs that started to emerge. Many of them were ZX Spectrum only, and they published their own magazines and organized meetings. The largest hobby computer club in the Netherlands would be the HCC, which means Hobby Computer Club. They organized large computer trade shows and still exist today, albeit for old people who can't find the big blue E on their PC. But already in the 80s they started ignoring the ZX Spectrum. So yeah, I was never really that interested. By 1986, 10% of Dutch households owned a computer, and the main focus of computer clubs had shifted to gaming, even though parents mostly bought computers for educational purposes. There are no official numbers on how many households actually owned ZX Spectrums. The Spectrum models sold in the Netherlands were the same as the British machines, and they had the exact same packaging. The same thing was the case for all subsequent models. They did, however, have a Dutch power adapter, which was changed to match our wall outlets. And like any other Sinclair product, these were riddled with issues. I remember having to return like 5 or 6 of them. Software was widely available in the Netherlands in the machine's early years. Most of it consisted of British titles and almost nothing was translated to Dutch. The only exception being the infamous Horizons tape. You had to pay extra to get it, but at least it existed in a Dutch version. The Spectrum sections in shops were never as big as the Commodore ones. If a shop sold Spectrum software, they would almost never have stacks of them in stock. Except if you visited really specialized computer shops, of which there weren't many around. I was lucky enough to live near Amsterdam, where there was a huge computer shop called Computer Collectief. They always had tons of the latest games. But this was an exception. Most shops would only have some titles, but it was hard to find the actual titles you wanted. The Spectrum wasn't used in schools or universities as far as I could find. But there was one educational institution that offered courses, diplomas and degrees by post. Their course, Microcomputers and Basic, came with either a C64, Acorn Electron or a ZX Spectrum, and they ran multiple advertising campaigns featuring the Speccy. The LOI advertising campaigns ran across the entire country, and you can imagine them playing a role in further promoting the Speccy in the Netherlands. Soon after the Spectrum's release in the Netherlands, tons of books about the machine appeared. They mostly stemmed from the educational market and focused mainly on programming the machine, either in BASIC or machine code. Apart from a Dutch author here or there, Most of the titles were translations of British publications. Round and about 100 Dutch titles were published in total. Apart from the MCN Computer Club magazine, there were also a couple of other Dutch Spectrum magazines. The most well-known one was Sinclair Gebruiker, which literally means Sinclair user. It was quite popular until it was pushed away by British magazines, but more on those later. As opposed to MCN magazine, which was just a commercial platform for V&D, Sinclair Gebruiker was an actual real professional magazine. It had news, reviews, letters from readers, type-in basic programs, hobby projects, a classified ad section, and of course none of that Commodore 64 nonsense. Another well-known magazine was simply called The Spectrum. It was home-produced and photocopied by some enthusiast on the other side of the country. It focused on games, pokes and cheats, news and other articles, and at its peak it had a couple of thousand subscribers. Apart from Sinclair Gebruiker and The Spectrum, there were a lot of other smaller magazines from different hobby clubs all around the country. The problem with Dutch magazines was that they'd almost never review the latest and greatest games. I found out later that they were always somewhat behind the real news in Britain. This was caused by most hobby magazines appearing only bi-monthly and Sinclair Gebruiker appearing 11 times per year. And while all these magazines were great, they were most of the time focused on grown-ups. But I was a young teen and I wanted more fun. And with a little bit of patience, I got it. On my birthday in January of 1986, my best friend gave me issue 1 of Your Sinclair magazine. From that day on, I no longer was interested in Dutch magazines or Dutch computer clubs. I was now in possession of the holy grail of Spectrum information and teen entertainment. Your Sinclair magazine opened up an entire new world for me. First of all, it taught me how to read and write English. Second, it taught me about games, games and games. Games companies, reviews, previews, competitions, you could win games even. Games from Britain and America, games related to movies and music artists, even games related to TV shows such as The Young Ones, which also aired in the Netherlands. It taught me about British humour, culture and politics, from the minor protests and Thatcherism to toilet humour and things like Viz comics. Me and a couple of other specky friends who also read Your Sinclair started saying things like ooh and fnar fnar, and we called games games, the English word for games, long before other Dutch people and media started using the word games instead of the Dutch word for it.
Spelletjes.
Yes, British magazines had a huge impact on Dutch readers, and it wasn't just Your Sinclair, of course. We also had Crash and other specky mags. Not to mention all the C64 and MSX magazines out there. There simply were no Dutch magazines that matched the style, content and quality of British ones. And remember, there was no internet, so if you didn't have magazines, you didn't have anything. The superiority and sheer amount of British magazines were the main cause of the demise of Dutch magazines. And of course, none of the Dutch magazines had someone like Theresa Mohan, the editor of Your Sinclair, that everybody fell in love with. Okay, so I fell in love with her. I completely forgot about anything Dutch, and many Dutch Spectrum users did the same. British things were the real deal. When the magazine cover tape wars became a thing, Dutch readers would often be disappointed because most of the time the tapes were missing. Ask for it at the counter did not help at all. Later on, the cassettes were sellotaped to the magazines and got through correctly, but it was always a gamble whether you'd find one. Even though many Dutch people were perfectly okay with consuming British products, there were some barriers. For example, text adventures weren't very big in the Netherlands because they were all in English. Many people simply could not play those games due to the language barrier. Almost all Dutch people are fairly reasonable at English, but an entire game with difficult language was just one step too far. Other things that were hard to grasp were those based on typically British cultural phenomena, such as games like Handicap, School Days or Super Gran. These just did not match with our Dutch brains. What is so cool about a dude visiting pubs? Why do these kids wear uniforms in schools? Who's that dumb woman in a flying machine? We just did not understand. But thank Buddha, we also had Dutch software. Or didn't we? Apart from the aforementioned MCN titles and some homemade ones, there weren't any Dutch games to speak of. Maybe 3 or 4 educational titles could be found. Some other titles were Spy Story, a Dutch text adventure, and Jumbo Steamlock 3737, a steam train simulation game. And that is basically it. There just weren't that many Dutch ZX Spectrum titles. I guess there even were more Dutch business software titles than games. There was accounting software, tools for calculating taxes, a text editor, a basic compiler, and so on and so forth. But these soon faded away as more people started buying PCs and getting rid of their home micros. After its slightly successful initial years, the Speccy started to fade away from computer shows and exhibits in the Netherlands. Then it disappeared from Dutch shops, advertisements and magazines. The Commodore and MSX machines clearly were winning in my country, PCs were on the rise, and Spectrum owners became an even smaller minority than they already were. Slowly but steadily, Spectrum software moved from the top shelves to the bottom shelves, to bargain bins, and then disappeared. The hardware also disappeared. Peripherals, apart from joysticks, could only be purchased by mail ordering them through British magazines, and the computers themselves could no longer be found anywhere except on the second-hand market. These developments would push even more Dutchies to depend on British magazines, books and software. Computer clubs would close down, Sinclair Gebruiker magazine went bankrupt, the MCN never wrote about the Spectrum again, and those who were bad at English were now left in the dark. Mail ordering anything from the UK was a massive pain, by the way, primarily due to the British post office strikes in the 80s, but also because of customs issues. We weren't all one big Europe back then, not to mention that British shops sometimes wouldn't even accept Dutch postal checks. Buying games was useless anyway, because it could easily take 12 weeks before anything would arrive, and many a time the cassettes would be broken or damaged. If you won a prize in a British magazine, it would sometimes even take 6 months to arrive, and you'd already completely forgotten all about it. But thanks to the Spectrum continuing to live on in Britain, and British magazines still being available in the Netherlands, Spectrum Live could still go on. As a result of the Spectrum fading away over here, software piracy grew even larger. But what were we to do if shops no longer carried Speccy games? I myself started to use my parents' dual cassette deck to make compilation tapes. I started distributing them using classified ads on teletext or CFAX. There was a lot of software swapping going on, 10 games for 10 games. And those who had the newest games were always the most popular dudes. We sent those cassettes back and forth through mail, and opening one was like Christmas every time. They would always contain at least 5 or 10 games I'd never seen before. Hobby computer club meetings were replaced with software by post. You could easily obtain any of the newest and latest games within 3 or 4 days. So there really was no use in buying official legal software through British magazines. It simply was the way of things, and yes, we knew that it was illegal somehow, but hey, we were teens, we didn't care. Thanks to the Multiphase 1 by Romantic Robot, you could literally save any game, even if it was copy protected on its initial load. I used the device to add my cool hacker name to the loading screens. When the ZX Spectrum reached its final years of its commercial lifetime, a brand new machine was launched which was compatible with it. In a market where micros would now transition to 16-bit processors, the SEM Coupe was still an 8-bit machine. I enjoyed the machine very much, and I even designed the graphics for a game that was actually released in Britain. It was called Bats and Balls, and it was programmed by a ZX Spectrum pen pal of mine. The Sam Coupe, unfortunately, was not a commercial success, even though I had hoped that it would become as big as the ZX Spectrum. It could already be felt that this wasn't going to happen. The machine wasn't even available in shops in the Netherlands. It was just a little cherry on top of the 8-bit home micro era. During the Sam Coupe years, Dutch users started to notice that Your Sinclair and other magazines became thinner and thinner each month. The golden years of the Spectrum were almost over in the UK as well. I stopped buying the magazine and I stored my trusty old Specky in a box. In the Netherlands, many Spectrum users started to switch to Atari STs and Amigas. Some people even started to buy PCs, even though they were still very expensive. And as for me, myself, my ZX Spectrum Wonder years ended with me buying an Amiga. My Sam Coupe now ended in the box next to the Spectrum. Oh, the horror of now being a Commodore person, but I greatly enjoyed and admired the machine. But I never felt the real excitement and love for the machine as I had experienced with the ZX Spectrum. Like many others experienced as well, the true Spectrum feeling did not come back for years, until YouTube was invented and people started to rediscover the 8-bit rubber-keyed world that shaped our lives as kids. As any middle-aged person would know, rediscovering your childhood is a thing of beauty. I never expected it to be so strong, so emotional. In this stage of my life, when I truly wonder what's it all about and why things happen, I can only conclude that the Spectrum Wonder years were the most beautiful and fun time of my life. Even in the Netherlands, far away from the real action. That lovely little machine from another country was magical for me. First drooling at it as a kid in the shops, then buying it with my own pocket money. Starting with the 16K, later expanding its memory, then adding a plus keyboard and ending up with a 128K toast rack. The magazines, the games, the programming and the pen pals were such a huge and impactful part of my life. I never experienced anything like that ever again. Thank you, Clive Sinclair. Thank you, Specky. Thank you, British people. Thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart. So there you go, that's my little contribution to Spectrum history. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your Specky stories in the comments. If you're an international ZX Spectrum user, please let me know your experiences. If you're British, I'd love to know if you were aware of the Spectrum in the Netherlands at that time. If you're a Commodore 64 owner, I have to admit I also owned one at some point, and I liked it a lot. Thank you for watching, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.